Well, welcome everyone to the second webinar of our Arthritis and Lupus Awareness Month. I'm Kaylin Young, and I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs for ANRF. This year, our theme is Strengthen Every Step. So for the entire month of May, we're trying to empower our community with new tips, new information, and that's why in this webinar, we're discussing the landscape of new treatments for arthritis and autoimmune diseases. And we're offering very diverse perspectives on cutting edge therapies and future possibilities for treatment. We would like to thank our corporate sponsors for all of our activities for Awareness Month, including Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. With your support, we are able to bring this types of programming and information directly to our community. And so we are very grateful for the support, and we're excited to get going with this webinar. So first, I would like to introduce our panelists and allow them to give you a little bit of background and insight into what they're doing in their own research areas. So Dr. Tarin Bigley is our current ANRF scholar with a lab at the Washington University of Medicine in St. Louis. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what your research interests are and kind of where you're at in the landscape?
Sure. So I'm a pediatric rheumatologist and immunologist. So clinically, I see everything from immunodeficiency to pediatric autoimmune disease. On a research basis, I'm really interested in both the genetic as well as environmental, underlying causes of autoimmune disease. And the main focus in my lab is the impact of early life viral infections and the development of autoimmune disease and predisposition to autoimmune disease after subsequent infections or immune stimuli. And so right now we have a focus in a mouse model as well as in humans on trying to understand the progression from health to mild, maybe subclinical autoimmunity, and then to lupus and how viruses may play a role in that.
Fantastic, thank you. And Dr. Lauren Henderson is an ANRF alumni joining us today from Boston Children's Hospital. And what have you been working on?
Hi, you can hear me, right?
We sure can, thank you.
Good. So I'm Dr. Lauren Henderson. I'm also a pediatric rheumatologist. I'm at Boston Children's Hospital. I see patients in clinic, and then I spend time in the laboratory doing mostly translational research. So that means that I take patient samples, both blood and joint fluid, and try to better understand why children get arthritis. So my particular focus is in juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And the two forms of juvenile arthritis that I'm particularly interested in are oligoarthritis, so arthritis in few joints, the children who get that, and systemic juvenile arthritis. So that's a type of arthritis where there's a lot of systemic features. And we use patient samples to immunophenotype these samples to better understand why kids get arthritis.
Fantastic, thank you. And Dr. Helena Jonsson is an ANRF alumni and assistant professor at the University of Colorado. Can you tell us a little bit of what your focus is?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's an honor to be here. So I study CD8 T cells in rheumatoid arthritis. So rheumatoid arthritis is the most common kind of inflammatory autoimmune arthritis in adults. I'm an adult rheumatologist and a researcher. And so we're looking at this cell type that hasn't been studied very well to try to uncover new targets that we can treat to help more people feel better. And so that's, I see patients, but I spend most of the time leading my lab.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for being here and really opening up this discussion and making this accessible to our patients, especially with innovative therapies. And as we kind of move through the discussion, we appreciate all of your insight and the research and work that you're doing. For all of those participants on the webinar, you can always submit your questions. We'll have a little time at the end of the discussion. So if you have questions and as you think of them, you can submit them in the Q&A bucket on your Teams account, and then we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So today I'd like to open this up to kind of current and engaging treatments, right? Like as our umbrella. So what has been the most exciting breakthrough in your specialty? So since we have kind of a diverse perspective, we'll just maybe go in order of how people are on my screen. How about that? So Dr. Jonsson, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think that what's really exciting right now in rheumatoid arthritis research, and I think sort of across autoimmune disease, is better classification of patients. So, even though in rheumatoid arthritis, many people look the same when they come into clinic, we know based on how people respond to treatments that they're not all the same on the inside, right? And what I don't like as a rheumatologist is that sort of guess and check kind of approach that we need to do with treatments where we start methotrexate and then see how it does, and then maybe a TNF blocker, and then we'll see. And, and I never really know like what to try next because I have no idea what's going to be that medication that really makes the big difference in the end. I think that's where we're starting to see some progress now, and people using new technologies like single cell RNA sequencing and other fancy things to sort of try to classify what's happening on the inside so that we can do some kind of test that brings people to the effective treatment right off the bat, as opposed to, after like months and sometimes even like a year or two of trying and failing things.
Yeah. I mean, which is really incredible for patients, certainly. I mean, that's very exciting to see that developing. Dr. Bigley?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too. So just to echo that, I mean, we call lots of patients lupus, for example, but we know the manifestations are so different from person to person, and some of them respond great to the treatments we have, and we have lots of them that don't. And I think kind of building off that, we are learning so much about the mechanisms of disease, the things that our own cells are targeting to cause autoimmune disease. And so one of the kind of coolest things that I think has started to come out is the use of CAR T-cell therapy. I think we're just being introduced to that now, but as we're learning more about disease and learning more about what our patients' immune cells are targeting with their own body, some of this therapy that's being used much more in cancer, I think, could be very useful for our individual patients. Some that maybe they're recognizing, their immune cells are recognizing a specific protein in their joints or in their liver or somewhere else. I think we are starting to realize we might be able to use this technology where we have an immune cell that can target the bad acting immune cells in our body and lead to maybe more durable remission rather than targeting an inflammatory mediator that has lots of functions in fighting off infection in addition to promoting autoimmunity.
And Dr. Henderson, what about you? What's getting you really excited?
Yes, I completely agree with everything that's been said. I'm going to take a little different approach just to change it up. And this is particularly oriented to pediatric rheumatology, so hopefully that's okay. I think for children with rheumatic diseases, it's a rare population. And for a long time, children with pediatric diseases have been understudied. And I think what's really exciting in our field is the development of something called CARA, which is the Childhood Arthritis and Rheumatology Research Alliance. So this is where pediatric rheumatologists got organized to work together to study pediatric rheumatic diseases at basically, many academic sites across North America. And so we have a registry where we can follow kids forward prospectively as they start new medications. And we also have a biobank where we're collecting samples. As of now, we're collecting just blood samples. On the adult side, you guys are very advanced. I know you guys are collecting like frozen samples of like tissue and kidney. We're not there yet. But I think this is really huge for the pediatric community because children have been so understudied, and the fact that we can have a large registry to study patients clinically, and now we're starting to develop a capacity to collect samples from patients all over the country from children really is exciting for us in the future. So something to look forward to, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd like to dive back into that, but I would also like to introduce our other panelist, Dr. Monique Hinchcliff. Would you like to just give a brief introduction of yourself and your research areas? And then we were kind of just starting with, what is the most exciting breakthrough in your specialty? Oh, you're on mute. Always. There it is. We have the one.
Sorry. My name is Monique Hinchcliff, and I'm the director of the Yale Scleroderma program. I was recruited here in 2018 to head up a new scleroderma program. There was an existing interstitial lung disease program, but there was no rheumatologist who was seeing the scleroderma patients. So came in 2018 and have been busy setting up, as Dr. Henderson said, a patient registry, a biorepository. We're really collaborative. So we recently received a grant to enter all of our patients into the USTAR database, which is a international database, I think, of 267 centers where people are uploading patient data into a common database. And I mean, the publications that have resulted from those data, it's something exciting is coming out every month. And so I run a research program. I see patients. I'm busy teaching the residents and fellows and medical students about scleroderma and other autoimmune rheumatic diseases. Very collaborative, and so trying to get lots of brilliant scientists at Yale to study scleroderma and its different aspects. So lung, heart, GI tract, skin disease, you name it. We're trying to improve the lives of patients with scleroderma, which is what the ANRF is funding. Myself and Dr. Lee, he's in laboratory medicine and he's a new arrival to Yale. And so his work in T cells, we're trying to figure out what protein activates T cells in scleroderma patients. And if it's one specific protein or many different proteins, I think like the investigators in lupus, I think there's lots of different endophenotypes of patients, different subsets of patients that we need to treat differently. And so figuring out ways to scientifically subset patients, I think, is really where the field needs to go, even more in depth. And I would say the biggest development in scleroderma would be that we got our first 2 drugs FDA approved. First was nintedanib, which is a drug for interstitial lung disease, and the second was tocilizumab, which also was shown to be effective for patients with interstitial lung disease and scleroderma. And so I think that opened the floodgates. Now we have lots and lots of different drug companies that are coming to us. I don't know why it is. I mean, I guess it makes sense once you get one drug approved, everybody wants to study your disease, but that was kind of the rate limiting step for us in our field for a long time, was that we couldn't get any drugs approved. And now that we have 2, we're getting hit up by all the pharma companies to investigate new treatments. We have 3, soon to be 4 active clinical trials enrolling at Yale. So I think that's the most exciting thing, is that once you have some success seems to beget future successes, God willing. So we'll see.
That's really wonderful. So I kind of hear across the board that there's certain emerging themes that are coming out of this. And one is, this notion of having larger databases and larger repositories for information. And so for a patient population, can you kind of describe to us like why that is so important? Because I think also, to your point, Dr. Hinchcliff, it's very difficult unless there is, a drug that is indicated for a particular disease area to get a lot of traction, especially for things that are more rare, right? Especially in the autoimmune space. So for our patients in the audience and family members and caregivers, can we talk a little bit about like what the usefulness of that data is and why some of these repositories and collaborations with different sites are becoming more and more important to advance research in the field?
To me,
Yeah.
you'd like?
Oh, I'm just opening it up to anyone that has thoughts on that.
I can start it. I think on the pediatric side, this and Dr. Henderson, I'm sure we'll see this. This is very true because we have smaller populations, we have different age groups that we are considering, and we run into this all the time. We have medications that are approved down to a certain age, but not necessarily below that. And so it sometimes can be very difficult. We have good evidence that a treatment, even a newer treatment, might work, but it's really hard for us to get access to. And I think part of that stems from being able to access enough patients to do these studies. And sometimes, many times that has to be generated from a pharmaceutical. But on the pediatric side, sometimes if we can combine the knowledge, our experience between different institutes and have kind of that network and that database, it can be helpful, even that kind of like case series type data where it maybe isn't a big study that you would see for a brand new medication, but it's building off of, safety studies and then bigger randomized control studies that have already been done. And I think, the other thing related to that is, we've seen over the last decade plus just this huge boom in our understanding of the basic immunology of our diseases. And one thing that a lot of us in research are doing is we are doing large omics studies where we're generating just huge amounts of data that sometimes fits within our research and we might follow up on, but sometimes there are pieces of that aren't studied in quite as much depth, they aren't published. And so having also this network of other rheumatologists who maybe have those data sets and you can contribute to, I think is improving our understanding of the mechanism of their diseases, which is helping us identify targets of some of the, that we can utilize in thinking about how to use these emerging medications.
Keelan, you're muted.
I'm sorry. That's helpful. Nope, second time today. Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments on the usefulness of these larger registries and data?
I mean, I can just reiterate the importance of, there's a Conquer database in the US, there's the USTAR database, which is worldwide for scleroderma patients. There's the RISE registry, which I think most of us are probably familiar with, that's run through the American College of Rheumatology. But basically, these databases, it's usually the level of research that every patient, with the exception of a few, is comfortable participating in. So, we get bronchoalveolar lavage fluid from patients for research purposes. And I would say to patients, I would never ask you to do something that I personally have not done myself. So I have undergone every study that I do myself. So I get the bronchoscopy and I'm put to sleep. And because if it's safe enough for me, it's safe enough for a patient. And so I think, registry is kind of the lowest level of participation. It's easy. It's usually easy for patient. It requires less of a time commitment. They can usually enter the registry when they're in the office with the patient, or they can be sent a link at home. It's not invasive. It's, not too time consuming. So most people are comfortable with that level of participation, and the data is invaluable. That's how you come up with an idea in one cohort, and then you test and see if the same idea holds up in a separate cohort from maybe a different region of the world. And so you can perform experiments just using these data. So I think it's just a great way to get patients to feel like they're involved in helping us find cures for their diseases, and involving patients in advising what data to collect, what patient factors to collect, I think is also very empowering. We may think that something is very upsetting to patients, and they may have a list of 10 other things that they find that's really disabling and disheartening to them. So I think it's a great way for us to partner with patients too, with these registries.
And was just going to add to some of the diseases we study, maybe at Washington University in St. Louis, we only have a handful or even a couple
Right.
dozen, and so we can't get the type of data we need to really understand things from a basic science level to a treatment level. And so combining these across the country gives us an idea of what's shared between patients, maybe things that are very regional and that we need to understand. And we just wouldn't have this without partnering with other places.
Yeah, certainly. And I think you also touched on this a little bit. In fact, both of you did, but also kind of this notion of patient reported outcomes. So having the data actually coming from patients as well in tandem with, a biorepository is enriching the data. So when we talk about like access to new therapies for our broader patient population and family members, et cetera, and caregivers, what are some ways that patients can learn about new and emerging treatments? And, to that point too, like even at the base level of participation is through, in research for a patient perspective is through a registry, right? How do we feel about, is participation in things like clinical trials, is that helpful for patients to learn about emerging therapies and new treatment options? What does that look like for patients, especially on the verge of new treatment options as we develop new treatment options and new understandings of disease activity?
So maybe I can jump in on this one. I think that, I think that these largest, for people who are interested in participating in potential future clinical trials, participating in these registries can be good. And I would recommend like paying attention to that form that you're asked to fill out, because there's often a little box that says like, yes, like feel free to contact me for future studies, or they might say like, no, like never contact me again. Like you might be in the first
Right.
bucket, you might be in the second, either one is fine. Like, remember, your rheumatologist will never judge you about like whether or not you want to participate in these things. But the more you want to participate, like the more you can help. Like you're not limited to just participating in one thing. And so if you're interested in finding out about the latest, greatest things, remember to check that box on pretty much every like registry form, right? Because especially for rare diseases, I think those are often used. I think if you're interested in clinical trials, seeing an academic rheumatologist is often helpful. Those practices tend to be a bit bigger and tend to have more clinical trials going on. But even private practice rheumatologists will often be able to send their patients to the local academic center to participate. And so if this is something you're wondering about, ask your rheumatologist now and then, like, have you heard about anything new? Like, is there anything going on, like in our state, in our metro area or wherever you happen to be? Like your rheumatologist, if they're anything like me, they sometimes get a little distracted about the nitty gritties, about making sure you have your refills and things like that. So you might need to give them a little bit of a poke. Some rheumatologists are also a little bit shy about asking patients to help with clinical trials or registries or things like that. So if this is something that you're interested in, mention it, because like you'll probably see that rheumatologist like light up and be like, yeah, you're interested, like that's amazing. Yeah, someone will reach out to you because we have ways that you can help. And so so I think that's a way. The other way is probably like signing up for these like foundations and things like that, so like the Scleroderma Foundation. I know there are like psoriasis groups, psoriatic arthritis groups, sign up to be part of those, where you have a little bit more like you're more in the driver's seat. It's not a registry for research purposes, but that's another way to find out about clinical trials. Like there are so many things happening in so many diseases all the time that it's good to bring it up every now and then. I don't know of any kind of like, I mean, there is technically a government website where all the clinical trials are listed, but I, as a researcher, find that thing like pretty difficult to navigate. And so I don't think it's something that I would try to tackle as a patient, honestly.
That's fair.
I agree with everything that you just said. I would also, emphasize, I think it's amazing if you want to participate in clinical trials. That's, it helps the field so much, and for us to advance knowledge so much is a wonderful thing to do. The other thing, if you're looking for new therapies, that would imply maybe you aren't entirely happy with how you're doing on your current therapy, right? And so you should never really hesitate when you go in to see your rheumatologist to really have an honest discussion with them about how you're doing and what you want to be better, or that you don't feel that you're quite there. There's so many therapies out there. Often you can make switches. So I think sometimes children will come in at least and they'll minimize their symptoms, and it's not really the time to do that when you see your rheumatologist. You really want to be honest with them about how you're feeling, and if you think that you can be in a better place, how you could get there, even if that means like a switch.
Absolutely. That certainly leads to kind of another one of our questions, which came, directly from our patient population, which is how can we advocate for ourselves in terms of new treatment options? So, kind of piggybacking on that. So I heard, being really honest, that is the time to describe accurately, like what's happening. And if you feel like you could potentially feel better if you're not where you want to be, to discuss that. Do you have other tips for our patients and our community for how they can advocate for themselves, especially if they're interested in other treatment options?
Get them to increase the, email your senators, because it's the budget, folks. Like there's money that's set aside for conducting research, and it's through the National Institutes of Health. The Department of Defense also has a research budget, a medical research budget, and so it's allocated based upon there's people at those institutions who come up with the request for applications. And so, being active with your government representatives, I think, and your patient advocacy groups. So like somebody mentioned the Scleroderma Foundation, there's also the Scleroderma Research Foundation, but different patient groups, together you're stronger than your voice alone. And I think, and if you happen to win the lottery, I always joke with my patients, like, definitely don't forget me. Like if you win 100 billion, I want half of it, not for me personally, but for the research. So I think just being involved, and I've had patients even email me, and one lady within the last year said, "Why aren't you doing CAR T? It's being utilized in MS and cancer. Why isn't it being investigated in scleroderma?" And we are launching a clinical trial with CAR T and scleroderma. We're in negotiations with 2 companies now. So, it takes time for us to get these studies launched, but knowing that there's people in the community that are really interested in participating, we're here to serve our patients. So if you want to participate, we'll design the studies,
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really good point, because I think when, so these clinical trials, like they often have like dozens, and sometimes even like, in terms of rheumatoid arthritis, like 200 or 300 like rheumatoid arthritis patients. And so it's never just one site. Like often each clinic will have to recruit, 5 or 10 or 15 patients. And there's always that moment, I think, when like the person thinking about signing up as a site for this clinical trial wonders, like, are people interested in doing this? And so if you as an individual patient have sort of flagged yourself as like, yeah, like I'm interested in helping, I'm interested in trying new things, I'm not happy with my options, that are approved and on the market already, that helps to encourage the people at your clinic to sign up for as a participating site in these clinical trials for your condition. So, squeaky wheel gets the grease. So register your enthusiasm, because that will sort of filter up, through the clinic and hopefully get more clinical trials to you.
I was just going to make another quick plug, since we mentioned talking to your Congress people. It takes money to do research, but it also takes recruiting people who want to do research and who are going to take a portion out of their time to do that they're going to see patients a portion of time and be in the clinic. And so it really requires that we receive grant money, that we have support, not only for our salary, but for our lab. But this is becoming, I think in medicine in general and in subspecialties, but we're seeing this as really a huge deal in pediatrics, is because there just is such limited even reimbursement for the clinical work we are doing. We're seeing a huge decline in people even going into the fields of pediatrics or pediatric rheumatology. And so there's now become this huge shortfall. And as there's a shortfall in people to even see the patients, it gets more difficult to justify the time to do the research. There's whole states without pediatric rheumatologists. And so I think this is a very, very important point for our rheumatology community at the, the physician level and also the patient level, and talking to our Congress people to make sure we are supporting not only the research work we do, but also the clinical work we do.
Yeah, well, I think this is also a good time to plug, the Arthritis National Research Foundation and other foundations for helping fill part of that gap, especially for funding, like rheumatology fellows or people thinking about rheumatology to sort of encourage that early pipeline. Then it's really like the government funded grants that fund the more senior people, and that's sort of another issue. But thank goodness for the ANRF, because I think like the research community would be smaller if it wasn't for you.
You are certainly speaking to.
Completely agree with that. Yeah, you guys provided funding at a really important time.
Honestly, getting somebody like Mark Lee to want to do research in scleroderma is made possible by research funding, because when you have somebody who's bright, and I think the other people can on the call can attest to this, that there's not that much time that the department chairs give them when they come into academia to get grant funding. And if they can't secure grant funding within, a year or two, they get sent to the clinic. Like they're in the clinic and they're seeing patients full time. And it's very hard to go back the other direction where, you're 100% clinical and then suddenly you come up with a brilliant idea. I mean, it's virtually impossible. So I think getting the people who are well-trained right out of fellowship, joined fellowship, right out of fellowship, the junior faculty, to get bitten by the research bug and to be successful in getting grants just gives you that confidence to go to the chief and negotiate a better package for yourself so that you can do 50% research or 75% research. Because you're not going to come out of, fellowship and get a big NIH or big Department of Defense grant. It's just not going to happen. It's baby steps. So, the smaller grants that are provided by the foundations are just invaluable for young faculty, I think, to launch their successful research careers.
Well, thank you. It certainly are speaking to the mission of the ANRF and really what inspires us to do what we do, right? To engage with early career researchers so that we have that, so that we can help support and continue to support the growth in the field of research. And also just, kind of circling back for our patients as well, on our website, we also have at curearthritis.org, we have a bunch of clinical trials that it is more of a warm referral. You will certainly know that we've vetted these and that they are, legitimate. So if you are interested in clinical trials, you can, of course, visit our website, and there's more information about the current clinical trials that may be available to patients. So as we kind of shift from like some of the challenges, right? So really answered some of our challenges to development of new research and how and what are some of those, obstacles to the development of new research. It's largely funding, right? And it's also getting that new generation of researchers in place and funded and inspired and excited to stay in the field. But for patients, as we look at new treatments, some of the things that we hear a lot of excitement around is personalized medicine. So what really is what does that mean to patients? What does personalized medicine mean to patients? And are you seeing trends that are exciting and things that people should follow when we hear buzzwords like personalized medicine and, especially for autoimmune and rheumatological diseases?
So, I think that personalized medicine means a little bit different things to different people. But I think for me, it really means that a rheumatoid arthritis patient or lupus patient or scleroderma or whatever have you, they should be able to walk into clinic, talk to their rheumatologist, and then like we need, like, you know, in a perfect world, we'd have like the tools to be able to say like how to make them feel better, like right off the bat, you know, like, and not have to guess and check it all, you know? And that's where I'm like, you know, I mentioned earlier in the webinar, like seeing some progress, like we're not there at all yet, you know, like I wish I had like a quarter for every time I had a conversation of like, and now we're going to start medication X. It's kind of 50-50 about whether it'll work or not. So come back and see me in about 6 to 8 weeks and we'll do the thumbs up, thumbs down visit. You know, like I'm tired of having those visits. Like I'd rather send off a test or something like that so that I can say like, this is the medication that's going to work for you and is going to help you feel better, because for you, for your person, you know, this is the medicine that you need, personalized medicine. And it has to do with genetics. It has to do with molecules, you know, maybe it has to do with like viral infections that you were exposed to in childhood, like what Dr. Bigley works on. Like, we don't really know. And I think that's going to get, like, we're not very good at it right now in rheumatology, but I think we will get better and better at it. And I think it's the kind of thing that will get better and better over time. So like 10 years from now, I think we're going to have some element of it. 20 years from now, it's going to be better. 100 years from now, it's going to be way better than that. And 200 years from now, it's going to be like fantastic. And so we have so much to do to get there, but it is going to happen. We just don't have it yet. Right now, it's still a bit of a dream. But like, at least now I think we're in the phase where we have many medication options. We just don't know which one to choose. And that to me is personalized medicine.
But on a happier note, I would say there have been some advancements. I mean, I think, you know, even just the way that clinical trials are conducted, where, you know, you might have to have a radiographic finding to get into the study for a particular osteoarthritis study, perhaps, or in my field, you had to have a high CRP, so a high inflammatory marker, to get into the trial for tocilizumab. So based upon the mechanism of action of the drug, they're recruiting a specific type of patient, a patient with a specific maybe lab test result or an imaging finding, you know, to try to if you take 100 people with different diseases and all give them the same drug, the drug is not going to be effective. But if you can enrich your sample for people that you really think the drug will be effective for, you know, you're more likely to be successful. And that was the story of tocilizumab. You know, it was a drug that targeted inflammation, and by recruiting patients that had inflammation at baseline, you know, the drug was effective. So it sounds so simple, but it makes it harder to recruit it, because you screen a lot more patients if you're only looking for a specific, you know, sliver of the patient group to treat. But I think that's where we need to go. And also, you know, platform trial design. I don't know if any of you, are you all doing that in peds at all, where you have like one control group and then multiple treatment arms so you can test more therapies? That's something that's been new in scleroderma, which I think is really going to be transformative, because we have so many novel treatments to test and there aren't enough patients to test them in. So it makes sense to just have one control group, you know, ethically as well, that you're limiting the exposure to potentially toxic medications, and you're also giving the opportunity for patients to get those novel therapeutics that might be really transformative. So I don't know, that's been an exciting development to the platform trial design.
I think we have a couple of rare pediatric trials with that, like with Miss C in recovery. There's also something called like a basket trial, where you take, especially in primary immunodeficiencies, where you take kids with different diseases that might be treated with the same drug to see how they do. I think what's also exciting about personalized medicine is that the technologies that are probably allow us to do personalized medicine are really just developing at such an accelerating pace. It's just like really unbelievable. Like the technologies that allow us to really look like at individual cells, like in arthritis, like in the joint that's causing problems, or individual cells in the kidney if you have lupus that cause problems. It's really remarkable. So like some of us will use things like called single cell RNA-seq, where you suspend a single cell in a droplet and you sequence it and you get the gene expression of that cell. I mean, if you think about it, it's crazy. And we're doing this all the time now. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was even more expensive. We were doing more, not that frequently. And now we're doing it all the time. And the way that technology is advancing and how the cost is coming down is allowing us to get so much information about the immune response in specific organs that are involved in autoimmune disease, that it's like really, really exciting time to be in research. And that's where things like AMP, this is like a big partnership. And I know the adult people would talk about this much more than me, where they looked at synovial biopsies with all these amazing technologies and learned so much, and then share the data with other investigators. I think that it's really exciting, and it's how we're going to move towards personalized medicine, I think.
Yeah. And I think like the other thing about that is that this has also made human samples so much more useful, because a little synovial tissue biopsy is like literally like the size of a breadcrumb, and so before, like 10 years ago, and especially like 15 years ago, like you could get very little information out of that piece of tissue. And so it wasn't really like worth collecting it. But now you can get so much information because of these technological advances that Dr. Henderson mentioned, that it's really like, the technology is advancing at like a breakneck pace. It's like, I feel like I have like whiplash every time I try to like write a grant proposal, because by the time I like send it off, it's already out of date.
I think a major improvement and growth in our field that's going to come from all that is what we call biomarkers. What are the findings that tell us that a patient is going to respond to this drug versus another drug, or that they are this subcategory of juvenile arthritis or lupus versus another subcategory. Maybe I'll end this in kind of a happy note. On a day-to-day basis. So I had clinic today and had a patient with juvenile arthritis. And one of the amazing things that's come out of all of this and all of the additional medications we have is I can somewhat personalize my treatment, and I can ask, would you rather be on a medication that you get a weekly injection, or one that's every other week, but you might have to take another medication with, or maybe as a once-a-day tablet? And I can talk about all of these different options as a legitimate and FDA-approved option for them, that maybe we don't know whether or not one specific drug is going to be the best based off of their genetic background or their biomarkers, but we know that on a population base there's a similar percentage that will respond, and so I can offer those and they can personalize what works best for their lives.
Yeah. Love. So as we look forward, and I like that positive note, so thank you. It's lovely to end there, because speaking of kind of the advancement of research and research technologies that are allowing us to, move forward at breakneck speed on the research side. So for patients in the next 10 years, like, what would you say is something that they could get really excited about? So how does that translate as technologies improve? How does that translate to new therapies that patients can be excited about? And especially as we look at the horizon over the next 10 years, like, are there specific areas where you would say, this is where I would get excited, this is what I would be looking forward to?
I could jump in there. I think, like Dr. Henderson said, the ability to look at a specific cell from a patient in a droplet, that was cutting edge 2-3 years ago. And now the spatial transcriptomics has come about, where you can look at the interaction actually in a slide. You can sequence the two cells that are interacting with each other. And so it isn't just the cells, it's the cells and their environment, so let's say you have an interest in T cells, then you can see what the T cells are actually, what are the cells that are around your T cell of interest. and what signals are going back and forth between those cells. So as Dr. Bigley was saying, there might be a combination, a cocktail of drugs that will work for you better than one single agent alone. And I think we've learned a lot from the cancer world looking at that. I can't think of any cancer that's treated with one drug now. It's a cocktail. And so maybe that's where we've gone wrong in rheumatology in the past, is that we've thought that, it's going to be one drug, and we've looked at drugs individually, and maybe we need to be looking at the interactions between cells and trying to identify medications that can target different pathways, different cell types. Outcomes may be better if we try that approach. So I would, buy a subscription to Scientific American and just start reading it, so that because like Dr. Henderson said, it's just so, the developments are so fast and furious. It's hard for us in the science community to keep track. So I think reading something that's written on a very sophisticated scientific level, but not for people who do this on a day-to-day basis, like Scientific American, is a great place to start.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in 10 years, we're going to have a much better way of recommending like which treatments to try first. Right now, I think that there is some benefit to offering, like the choice between a pill and an injection, and that's but I think that what patients would rather have is knowing that the medication that they're starting is 90% likely to work as opposed to 50% likely to work. And I think that is where we're heading. That is I think there's a very, very good chance that that's where we're going to be in 10 years. Saying that this medication is 80 to 90% likely to work for you for your rheumatoid arthritis, compared to the completely blind guess and check of 2024. And hopefully we'll get even better than that. I think I'm hopeful that it's going to be a blood test. I think that would be really, really great. And I think that the number of technologies that are coming out now that help us look deeper and look at new things, even in plain old blood tests, is going to be key to that. There's all these different tests for soluble markers and genes and, this, that, and the other. It's really an exciting time in rheumatology research.
And I would add, in addition to all the technologies, that just even the classes of medicines that are going to be available or therapies is going to probably be completely different. So a lot of the medicines people are taking now are like the MABs, like the antibodies, right, that you inject and take by IV that kind of block a certain protein, that immune protein. And then there's some new pills that you can take that modulate pathways in immune systems. But there's entirely new classes of therapies, like cellular therapies. It's kind of hard to explain, like the CAR T cells, where we're going to put in little cells that can actually go and target particular different cells in the immune system. These are completely different classes of therapies that I think are really, really exciting. We have no idea how much they're going to impact the field.
Yeah. I think the other area, a totally different area that I think is also going to see a lot of progress, is predicting who's going to get disease. And I know that this is on a lot of patients' mind, is what about my children? What about my siblings? How, what is their risk? How do we know what their risk is? And what do we do if they're at high risk? And those are three questions where we're also making a lot of progress, in terms of it's much easier to sequence DNA to identify genetic risk factors. We know more and more about environmental risk factors, for example, gum disease and people with rheumatoid arthritis and, various things like that. And then plus there are also clinical trials now for, are there medications that we can give to people who are at high risk that will prevent them from developing full-blown rheumatoid arthritis, for example. I think these are still, there have been a lot of attempts and pretty much no successes. And so, there's still a lot of work to be done in that realm. But I think that we will have made progress in 10 years. And I think that that's hopefully going to give people peace of mind about, their loved ones. Because I know a lot of people, their first thought after getting a diagnosis like that, especially if they have, their mother had rheumatoid arthritis and their grandmother had lupus or something like that, they're wondering what's going to happen to the next generation.
For sure. And I think also just, you touched on this as well, just simply advances in diagnosing to help get to those treatment options faster. And so, kind of to bring this back around to the new technologies piece as we can come to the top of the hour, but we get lots of questions about some of these things, like the use of AI, of predictive analytics, with computable phenotypes, with the predictive analytics to be able to diagnose patients faster, especially for those with rare diseases or those that aren't, like if you have lupus and it's not presenting as it might with others, just as an example. So are you seeing advances in, AI, telemedicine, and predictive analytics that are impacting new treatment options for patients?
I mean, I think having the electronic health record at many institutions, and there's progress that's been made in having a uniform way that we refer to every disease. So you think of, lupus, systemic lupus erythematosus, lupus nephritis, so there's researchers, it's not my line of research, but they standardize all the nomenclature across the electronic health record. So that was the first big step that was done. And my understanding is that's pretty complete. They've been able to do that. And so you can conduct experiments just using those data to see what treatments. It might even be a medication that we don't think, would be at all useful for treating a disease. For instance, like maybe statin therapies are really good for patients with Raynaud phenomena, because they help the endothelium heal. That's been an idea that's been out there for a long time, but no one's ever been able to really research it in a good experiment. And so maybe these will be the kinds of questions that we can answer utilizing AI, applying AI to large electronic health system data. I think the AI approaches in imaging have been transformative. The human eye is great at picking up patterns, but you can sometimes pick up things with a computer that the human eye isn't even able to see. And so I think being able to diagnose, there's work being done by an investigator at Harvard where they're looking at everybody who has a diagnosis of COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and going back and looking at the imaging that they had prior to the diagnosis that's in their system, and seeing if there's any imaging biomarker that was evident, in hindsight, and so that we could predict people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease earlier. So perhaps the same is true in rheumatoid arthritis, where there's changes on imaging long before we, the radiologist, would see changes on imaging. And that might be the time to, change your diet or start exercising more or reducing your stress in your life. I think that's another exciting area with partnering with complementary medicine, where food is a medicine, and trying to develop diets that help people remain healthy or regain their health.
I think with these large data sets we're generating, say from single cells, we have just enormous amounts of data, and we're doing studies on one population, and then someone might do another study in a similar population under a different circumstance. And one of the things AI can be really helpful for is that pattern recognition. And that can be difficult, across multiple data sets. And so having technologies to be able to help us identify those patterns that may not stick out to us based off of our current knowledge of immunology, I think is an area that AI can help. I think the challenge is providing the framework that AI needs to be able to identify those patterns in a meaningful way that we can utilize to, establish biomarkers or response to treatment or diet or changes in the bacteria and viruses in our gut. I think that will be a major area for AI to kind of fill as we move forward, because the data sets we're generating are just so huge. It's hard for any one person or even a group of people to analyze.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, thank you all so much for today. We appreciate you and sharing kind of the new vision of new treatments and what's coming next in the world of arthritis and autoimmune diseases. For the rest of the month, we have other exciting webinars. Our next one is on May 22nd at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's Managing Your Mindset. And so we would also like to thank our corporate sponsors once again, Johnson & Johnson and Innovative Medicine, for making this content possible. And again, thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise and really working with us in bringing this information and new treatment options to our broader community. So thank you again. We look forward to sharing lots more content for the rest of the month, and we will see you on our next webinar.